Georgia falls behind Texas in the AP poll, the poll that is used until the College Football Playoff Committee starts ranking, and I think it's justified. I think that Georgia should have dropped from number 1 after struggling to beat Kentucky 13-12 against a Kentucky team that sucked the week before. Kentucky got blown out by South Carolina in Lexington. And then Georgia turns around, goes up there, and loses. Well, this is about the rankings, and I think that Georgia being number 1 after that would have been a little bit like, a little bit of that prime Alabama treatment where, rightfully so, they were ranked number 1 on a week-to-week basis unless something shady happened or they lost. Well, 35 plus 28 is, drumroll please, 63. So Texas gets 35 of the 63 first-place votes. I really hope that number is right. Georgia gets 23, and Ohio State gets 5. Texas 1, Georgia 2, Ohio State 3, Alabama's 4, Ole Miss is 5, Tennessee 6, Missouri 7, Miami 8, Oregon 9, Penn State 10. That's the top 10. If you don't know what the current ranking is, I just gave it to you. And I think that Texas has earned the number 1 ranking for now. Right? I think that Texas has been the best team in college football through 3 weeks. It's hard to say that it's Georgia after what happened against Kentucky. And yes, I am talking about a third of it, right, so far. I'm talking about 1 game. And this happens on occasion, right? Once or twice a year, we see Georgia just not play to its standard, is the best way to put it. Georgia didn't play to its standard against the Wildcats on Saturday, and it got them in a pickle at the end of the game, right? They were losing in the fourth quarter. They were losing heading into the fourth quarter and only won by 1 point. Gave Kentucky the ball back, and it could have been worse. Kentucky could have had a real chance. Didn't have a super legit chance to tie it with that last possession. But we're talking about hanging by a thread against a team that I took Georgia to cover by 24 and a half points. That was the betting line. I took Georgia to cover, and I ended up looking like an idiot in that, but that was a pretty common take heading into the game. And now Texas has won. Well, what has Texas done? Blew out Colorado State like it's supposed to, 52-0. Beat Michigan by almost 20 points up in Ann Arbor, and then 56-7 with its backup quarterback leaving early. They don't skip a beat, or with Quinn Ewers leaving early with an ab injury that they don't think is actually serious. Arch Manning comes in there, and he balls out. He actually looked a little bit better than Ewers in moments, right? I think Quinn Ewers really is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. But now Texas is in a situation where it could probably win with both Arch and Ewers. You'd rather have the older guy out there that's had a little more experience and has started in a college football playoff game, but they know with Arch that they'll be just fine, that they can at least compete to win these big football games. Texas has looked smoother. There hasn't been this lull. This is the biggest difference between Texas and Georgia and some of the other schools. Look, I think that you can make the argument Georgia should be lower than 2. That's just kind of the truth of it, and I'll get to that in a second. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post asking you to sign up for our newsletter. Bye week this week. We're still going to put out Final Feelings. We're still going to put out our picks. I'll still put out 5 for Friday. From a premium content standpoint, if you are a Dawg Post subscriber, you're getting everything that you would have gotten minus the Georgia football game this coming weekend. And, of course, the week after that, Georgia plays Alabama. We've got an offer that only lasts till then. Dawg Post for $1. You can become a subscriber, right? Make sure you're checking out our newsletter, though. If you just want a taste test, you want to dip your toes in the water. One, thank you to our already, if you're already on our mailing list, if you're already a part of the Dawg Post newsletter. But this is a free way to check out if you really like Dawg Post. So make sure you're looking at the link that I've got in the description of this video and checking it out. We appreciate that. To all of the new viewers or the people who haven't convinced yet, make sure you put that. We're putting out all sorts of content over on Dawg Post. The biggest difference between Georgia and Texas is Texas hasn't had a lull on offense. Georgia's defense has been probably the best in college football through 3 games. Hold Clemson to 3 points. You should, but you hold Texas Tech to 3 points. And then, even though it was sloppy, and even though it's like, Georgia, not the number 1 team in the country, the defense looked the part, and they still hold. They bent, but oh man, that's a lot of B's. They bent, but didn't break against the Wildcats. 4 field goals is all Kentucky could do to score, and that's just not good enough to beat Georgia, right? Georgia beat a team that didn't score a touchdown on them. the defense has been elite. The offense has had some lulls, and just like 2021, I was telling Dean and Matt, it was at media days in Birmingham, Hoover, whatever you want to call it, over there in Alabama, the SEC media days over the offseason 3 years ago. I was like, hey, man, this offense is going to be elite. I think the defense is going to be really, really good, but this offense is going to be elite. And at that time, it was going to be JT, Daniels, George Pickens, Eric Gilbert, all that. It didn't end up being that way. The defense ended up being one of the most elite units ever. And now, through 3 games, Georgia's defense looks like it can compete for that title, right? There's a lot to go, and there's a lot of good offenses that the team's going to have to play. It's been the offense that's been the issue, and it's a little bit confusing. It took a whole half to get rolling against Clemson, and Clemson's got a good defense. It's going to be one of the best defenses to face. And you could say that about Kentucky, too. I do think that the Wildcats have one of the better defenses that Georgia will play this year. But through 12 quarters of football, 3 games, half of that, first half against Clemson, a whole game against Kentucky. So we're talking about that's 6 of those 12 quarters right there where Georgia's offense was just flat out not good, not productive, not moving the football, and not scoring. Then you examine the Tennessee Tech game, it's like, well, this is a glorified scrimmage that ESPN called it. It is a game that Georgia should blow out. I thought that Georgia's offense could have looked better. I really do. It started off super high, and then it lulled a little bit, and all of a sudden Carson Beck threw I want to say 4. He went 11 for 11 for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns to start the game against Tennessee Tech. And then about 4 out of the next 6 passes, I believe, were incompletions. At least 3 out of the next 6 passes were incompletions. They hit a lull period against a defense that they should have been cutting through like a hot knife through warm butter. I botched that saying up, but you know exactly what I meant. So for at least half of the season so far, Georgia's one half of the football hasn't looked good for Georgia. It's just not been productive. So you go and you examine Texas. Well, they blow out Colorado State. They beat Michigan pretty bad, and they blow out. They looked good on both sides of the ball throughout it. Yeah, they've let up more, 2 more touchdowns than Georgia. But, or maybe it was just the 1. I actually can't remember if Michigan scored a touchdown. I don't remember exactly how they got to 12. But regardless, they've just looked a little bit smoother, and they went up, and they did it on the road. One of the other things. They went up, and they looked good on the road. Georgia didn't look good on the road. Well, now you enter this phase of the season. Georgia's going to have to go to Bama. They're going to have to go to Texas. They're going to have to go to Ole Miss. It doesn't get easier. This is one of the big road trips that Georgia's had to do, and it's a good warm-up for what's going to have to happen. But at the end of the day, Georgia just didn't look as good enough. So I think you can justify Texas over them. I don't know that you can justify Ohio State over them quite yet. Georgia does have a ranked win, and it has a really good ranked win over Clemson. But, Ohio State blowing teams out they should, had a bye this past week. Tennessee, if you just look at numbers and you look at the fact that they beat a ranked opponent by a lot, I don't think Tennessee will end up one of the 5 best teams necessarily, but you could argue that Tennessee should be ranked over Georgia based off of what's happened. Alabama struggled too much against South Florida for me to justify saying, yeah, I think Alabama could have moved up over Georgia in the polls. I don't think you can say that about Miami, Oregon. Missouri could maybe get a little bit more love. Ole Miss is blowing teams out. It's tough at the top. It's loaded at the top. And this is going to be a hell of a college football season that Georgia is just not number 1. This has happened before. They were not number 1 to start 2021. I think that there was a couple weeks that they weren't number 1 a year ago. 2022, they certainly lost the number 1 ranking for at least a week. It happens. Georgia, to me, is still a contender. It's still arguably the best team in the country, but right now it hasn't looked like it. It really has looked like Texas is number 1, and this is a fluid thing. Texas doesn't have way more points. The AP poll, it's 1,540. These points are added up based off of the way that the voters voted. Georgia's got 15-18, so they're only 22 points behind Texas. That's not a very big gap at all. Georgia could easily flip. Georgia will flip. Georgia will be number 1 if they beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa. It will go back to Georgia being ranked 1. It's just how it's going to go. This is going to be a fluid situation. But at this moment, I think the polls are right. You look at the FPI, Georgia's 5. Coaches poll is the only one that Georgia didn't fall in, and that's interesting to me. Maybe the coaches are just giving Georgia its props, giving Georgia its flowers and the respect that it has earned as a program. But this is a week-to-week basis ranking, and Georgia should not be number 1 right now based off. There hasn't been enough. There's only been 3 games, and Georgia just hasn't looked like the number 1 team through those 3 games. It has dominated in some ways, and it also has struggled in some other ways. I think Texas being one's fine for now in terms of critically thinking about these rankings. Georgia can get this one back, and I think that they probably will at one point this season, or at least get pretty far in the end. But at the moment, Texas is number one.